Hi there cupcakes, thank you so much for joining me again on my channel. I always really appreciate it. I've come here today in this preposterous 70s collar, darling, to talk to you guys about something that I think is such a worthwhile topic. It does the rounds in various different guises in the spiritual and witchy and woo-woo communities, and that is because a lot of people within the realm of these communities, the kinds of people who generally tend to watch my videos, are the kinds of people who also would identify as spiritual supporters, spiritual healers, space holders, nurturers, people who tend to be approachable to others, people who tend to be able to help others with their issues, good listeners, you know, that kind of thing, and tend to be very empathetic or even in some cases empathic. And so these kinds of issues can come up for those amongst us who do fulfill that kind of, I don't know, like the Queen of Cups type vibe, the nurturer, the space holder. Now, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, I'm spiritual, I'm on a spiritual journey, and this doesn't describe me whatsoever, I wouldn't consider myself necessarily a space holder or a classic nurturer, then doesn't matter. I'm not saying that you're broken. I'm not saying that your spiritual journey isn't authentic or it's not legitimate. It's really a stereotype, to be honest with you. There are a great many spiritual people who are in an active spiritual practice and really take it seriously and have it very close to their hearts, who do not necessarily find that their skills involve holding space, you know, talking out people's problems with them, offering spiritual guidance, offering counsel. So you're perfectly normal. I'm not saying, well, you're probably not normal. I doubt many people that watch my videos and engage with them are normal necessarily. But what is normal? That's all another video. Let's get back to the point. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying you're broken. This video might not necessarily be as useful to you as it will be to people that know that they tend to be those who hold space, give the listening ear, give the spiritual guidance, maybe use divinatory tools to aid and guide the people in their lives. However, if you're not necessarily a nurturer and you don't necessarily fulfill that role, you may still find it really useful to watch this video. Number one, because you might know somebody who is the nurturer in your family or friendship group or spiritual community, and you might find that some of what you have to learn helps you to better understand them. And number two, because you might be engaging with a nurturer, a classic nurturer or spiritual supporter, in a way which is unhelpful and unhealthy, and this video might actually take you to the crux of that issue and show you what it is that you might be doing that's not helpful. So might be worth still watching it, or you can just watch it because you find this pattern gripping. I know I do. And the strobing happening between the pattern in the back and the pattern in the front. I mean, come on, the earrings, come on, you're sticking around, you know you are. It is lovely to be considered as a good person to go to when one has a problem and they need to talk it out. It's a privilege and an honour to be in a position where people see you as someone that they can trust, someone they can open up to, someone that they would go to if they had issues and they needed a strong space holder, someone that was going to give them guidance or just listen to them in a non-judgmental way. I find that to be a great honour and a great privilege. Does it come with shadow? Absolutely fuck yes. Does it come with baggage and issues? Fuck yes. And that's really what a lot of this video is going to be about. I'm not intending to say that being a space holder, being a giver, being a nurturer is a bad thing or that it's wrong in some way. Actually, I've always pretty much been seen as a listening ear by people who get even remotely close to me. I'm often seen as somebody who can be trusted, who will hold space in a non-judgmental way, and who will help somebody to reach conclusions, but also someone who is willing to break out the cards, willing to help somebody strategize. And I love being seen as that person. I love being that person. But today with this video, I want to acknowledge some of the shadows and some of the limitations, and that's what we're going to be doing here. So if you feel like that's something you need, let's do this. I've got some notes that I'm working from, so I'm going to start with talking a little bit about why people might gravitate towards you as someone who is a nurturer, someone who is a space holder. Why are people doing that in the first place? Let's have a look at some of the key reasons why it might be happening. I think that will be useful before we look at the limitations, the shadows, and what to do about some of the issues that you might be facing. So some of the things I've written. Number one of the reasons people might approach you a lot to talk about their problems or to get help from you is because you invited them to do so. You actually set the precedent that you are someone that they can go to. You kind of put it out there in one way or another, either explicitly or discreetly or, you know, in a non-verbal way. But you actually communicated that you are that person that can be approached when somebody has problems. So that's number one, is that you actually invite people to see you in that context. And obviously a lot of the time, that's probably the message you want to put out, you know, come to me. I'm a nurturer, that's one of my skills, but it can also have its problems. It can also lead to burnout, resentment, being used, feeling like you're being used, and I'm going to get to all that. So number one, because you invited them to. The second thing I've written is that you have good energy, you have nice vibes, you are just someone that people feel good around, and when they leave the time spent in your company, they seem to feel more confident, more empowered, better about themselves. So it seems as though your energy is good for people in general. Another reason is that you do offer the use of divinatory methods to help your friends and loved ones. You might offer tarot card readings or, you know, rune readings or palmistry. You may also be into reiki, astrology, dream interpretation. You might speak to guides and things like that on behalf of others. So you might be someone who does actively bring their spiritual skills and spiritual beliefs into the way that you tend to help people. So you are offering your services in that way to your friends and loved ones. And that can be something that if people find it's helpful, they want to come back to you for. They want to have that again. Another thing I've written is that you are a qualified therapist or carer, or you work as a spiritual helper in your professional life, something like that. So you're already kind of seen as a person that it would be obvious to go to because of what you do for work. And also it might be difficult for you to get out of work mode if you're in any of the caring professions or listening professions. So it's like you carry your work around with you kind of thing. So that's another thing I wrote. Another thing I wrote is that you tend to be able to hold non-judgmental space. You are somebody that can allow a person to go across the terrain of the issue they're having and figure it out for themselves. And you might ask really useful questions. You might ask very open questions which encourage the person who's talking to you to get a sense of what they really feel and what they really think. But you won't do it in a pushy way. You won't do it in a way that feels bossy or domineering, and that can be very appealing to people. So if you're skilled at holding non-judgmental space, that ought to do it. Also, if you're a good conversationalist, again, this is partly about asking those open questions that make somebody think about their situation more. But it's also about being able to respond when it's time to respond, again, in a way that engages the other person and makes them feel like they're really getting to the bottom of something rather than going round in circles or being talked at. So if you're a good conversationalist, again, people may find you to be approachable when talking about problems. Not always. There are some people who are amazing conversationalists that you would never open up to about your problems. So I think sometimes a number of these things, a number of these characteristics have to come together in a cluster. Another thing I've written is that you leave people feeling refreshed and empowered. So by the end of a conversation with you, you leave someone feeling markedly different energetically and emotionally than they did before. You may leave them feeling often that they finally have a strategy, they finally have things they can think about, and that is really valuable. That's something that a lot of people really deeply appreciate. So that's some of the reasons why people might gravitate towards you as a nurturer, as a helper, and those are the things that you might be providing to someone that make them feel like they want to come back to you, maybe time after time, or certainly when they have those big challenges that they're going through. Let me go into some of the downsides of this now, some of the shadows, some of the limitations. You might be able to identify with one of these, you might be able to identify with several of them. My hope is that some people are going to listen to some of the things that I've put on this list and the penny is going to drop for them and they're going to be like, oh, that's what's happening. One of the main issues that people tend to discover when they are good at giving spiritual help, reading tarot for people, guiding people, that kind of thing, is that they come across some people who just ask too damn much. You know, it becomes almost outrageous. It's like every time you see a person or get them on the phone, they want you to draw cards for them, they want you to connect with guides for them, they want to know if you can hear the voice of their dead relative, and it really becomes something that you are only seen for. It's like you're only seen as a spiritual supporter of one variety or another. You're not seen in a nuanced way. They're not seeing anything else about you. They're not concerned really about anything else about you. And that can feel really shitty. It can feel really lonely. It can feel really disappointing. So there's that. There's those people that just won't take the hints, even if you are dropping quite regular hints, that you do not want to be asked about this all the time and that you don't want to go into it. And if you find that you do struggle with assertiveness or boundaries, or you're not sure how to approach this issue with someone, you might find yourself consistently giving out reams of spiritual advice or holding loads of space for someone, and it's just too much. You know, they're asking for too much, basically. Sometimes people who come to you for spiritual guidance or to get space held for them are asking you for the answer. They're asking you what they should do. They're asking you to give them actually the answer to the question, to solve the equation for them, and they will be comfortable laying the blame at your feet if things go wrong and if they do not get their desired result after following your advice. So that's something that you can end up falling into sometimes quite easily, and then later you can look back and be like, I never wanted to tell you what to do, but that was what you were vying for, so that's what I ended up giving you. And you can end up feeling disappointed with yourself about that. Sometimes people really just want to know the answer. They disempower themselves by convincing themselves that somebody else has the answer, somebody else has access to the intuition, and they don't really have any power of their own to make an empowered decision for themselves. So that can be a trap that people get themselves into when they offer spiritual insight or hold space. Another thing is that there is a lack of reciprocity in relationships. So you might find that in one specific relationship, as I mentioned before, you are only seen as someone who gives spiritual input or holds space. And you notice maybe with that relationship that when you need help or need advice or need a chat about something, the reciprocity is not there. The generosity is not forthcoming in the other direction, and that is a problem. Sometimes you might find that that happens with several people, that happens with clusters of people, and sometimes it's just happening with one person who just doesn't seem to realise how selfish they're being and how they are treating you a little bit like a cow that they come along and milk for spiritual insight, and then you don't need anything in return. You know, you're not thought about. You might find that there's a person or some people in your life who become very dependent on your advice. They won't make any decisions without it. They're convinced that they need it in order to take any steps or any actions. That can be very draining. That can end up making you feel like you have far more responsibility for somebody than you actually should do. And also, of course, these kinds of relationships can make you feel really disrespected. They can make you feel used. Another issue that can crop up is that sometimes a person will come to you about something that you are just too close to, and you don't want to help with that necessarily. So you might end up being caught in the middle between two partners, for example. Maybe you're friends with both partners. Maybe they have issues between each other. Maybe they both want to come to you for spiritual insight or for space to be held for them, but you feel like, you know what, I don't really want to listen to you talk about each other. I love you both, and this is not something that I can personally facilitate. Sometimes parents ask you to do that. Sometimes close friends ask you to do that. Sometimes you're just placed in a situation where you're not the one that can facilitate that healing or that discovery. It's too close to you, and therefore you can't be unbiased about it, but also you don't necessarily want to have your head in it all the time because it involves you explicitly. So that's definitely something that can happen. I thought a little bit about the more shadowy area of things, the areas where you might really need to be honest about where the shadowy side of your nature might be kicking in and kind of motivating you as a nurturer or a guide or a healer or a supporter, all these words, light worker, whatever you want to call it, however you refer to it in your paradigm. And one thing I wanted to mention was that sometimes you can end up equating your worth with how much you can actually give spiritually. So especially if you've set a precedent that you are someone that can give spiritual advice, divination, you know, just listening, being that listening ear, taking people through meditation, deep breathing, that kind of thing. If you've set up a precedent that you can do those things, you can facilitate those things, then you may have put yourself on a path to believing that that's the only worth you have. And even if people do value you for lots of other things, it's like you get this insecurity in your head that you are only valued for what you can give in that regard, or you feel like if you stop giving quite so much in order to factor in your needs, you're going to be rejected, you're not going to be valued as much, and that can be a really painful thing to imagine and to worry about. One big shadow that I think is really important to recognise and to kind of check yourself for if you are a natural nurturer is whether or not you get a kick out of being the nurturer in a shadowy way. So for instance, is your ego fed by the idea of yourself as as being the person with the answers, the person that can aid other people through their challenges? Is that something that makes you feel superior to others? Does it give you power over others? Does it make you feel special in a way that is actually destructive? That can be a difficult area to go into and to shadow work. And I would definitely advise that if you do go into that area and you find that yes, your ego is negatively fed by the idea of yourself as a nurturer, don't beat yourself up about that. That can actually be pretty normal. Really what we need to do when we recognise we are natural nurturers and space holders is just to keep checking in with that. I've been checking in with that for bloody years, ever since I first started doing videos and putting my messages out there and trying to be of service to people. I've always tried to check in with my ego and ask myself, what is your agenda? What is your motive? How are you feeling about this? Are you taking it to shadowy territory? And let me be clear, there's nothing wrong with being proud of a certain set of characteristics and abilities that you have that have helped others. That's amazing, and no one can take that away from you. It's important that you love that about yourself and you're like, yeah, that's something I can do, that's something I can provide, and I enjoy providing that, and I enjoy seeing the positive benefits of it in other people's lives. But what you want to avoid is feeling like you are kingpin and you are the Mac Daddy because you help everyone else and everyone comes to you, and aren't you so great, and don't you have all the answers, you know? And that's the kind of thing that you want to make sure you avoid. And it's just by checking in and making sure that everything is in place where your ego is concerned and where your sense of self is concerned. Are you still accepting when you have things that you need to learn? Are you still accepting when you are challenged by something, and are you seeking help when that happens? Or are you very much stuck in this idea that now you're the person that provides all the input, you help others, and you don't go to anyone for help because you know all the answers? If you're in that territory, then obviously things have gone a little bit awry. So that's something you might want to look into. Definitely ask yourself about that. Another thing that you might want to look at that could be shadowy for you if you're a natural nurturer is this tendency that you may have to not be able to express when you need to take a time out or when you might be in a crisis period. And this is another thing that really, it's both a shadow and a limitation. You need to look at the fact that when you're going through a challenge or when you're facing a tough time, you might not be able to provide as much support and as much space held as you would ordinarily, and you have to be able to assert that. And sometimes if you are overly equating your worth with what you can do for others, then you're not going to want to assert that. Or if you are getting a kick of superiority out of providing nurturing and guidance for others, then again, you're not going to want to turn around and say, I'm going through a bit of a tough time, guys. I can't really be the one to help you with this right now. I need to focus on me. Because you're not going to be getting the egoic kick from playing that role for a while, and you will crave that. So again, this is something to definitely think on. I mentioned earlier that you might come across people in your life who become addicted or dependent upon your advice or your help, and they will convince themselves that they can't make any moves without checking in with you first. You might find that you start to enjoy that. You might find that you actually like the feeling that people are coming to you before they make any moves. So it's almost like you start to infantilize them in a way, because you start to also feed into their illusion that they need your input first, or they need to speak to you first. And it can feel great to be needed in that way. Is it a shadowy motivation? I would argue yes, it is. It's one thing to enjoy the feeling of knowing that you've aided somebody in feeling empowered or feeling healed in some way. That's lovely to know you were part of that journey. But if you feel like you want people to have that sense that they need you in order to flourish, then again, that's where things have gone a little bit wonky, and you need to look into that. Because really what you should desire, what we really should as a rule desire for the people in our lives, is that they should be able to feel that yes, they can reach out for some input when they feel they need help, but that they also have a strong sense of their intuition, what's right for them, and what is going to be the next right action that they need to carry out. So, you know, we need to want that sense of freedom and empowerment for the people in our lives, rather than wanting them to remain wounded birds forever, you know, with a dodgy wing that needs us to come along and apply the bandage and, you know, help that wounded bird. I think there can be a high that comes from being the person in the position to fix the wing and help the bird. And sometimes, you know, the shadow doesn't want that bird to fly free. The shadow wants that bird to be dependent. Unfortunately, this sometimes happens for people who go to a professional therapist. It's happened to a few people I know where they've decided to wrap up the therapeutic relationship. They feel like they've come to a point where they're okay and they can move forward solo, and their therapist has had a very negative, shadowy reaction to this. They've taken it extremely personally. They've tried to really convince that person not to leave the therapeutic environment, and they've been quite mean to their patient or their client about it. And that's coming from a place of not wanting to let go, really, of that feeling of being the one who holds the space, imparts the wisdom, etc. It's the feeling of wanting that relationship to continue, even if the person in that relationship with you is saying that they are ready. And you have to respect somebody's needs, somebody's sense that they are ready to move forward solo. Another thing you might want to shadow work if you tend to be the nurturer, the space holder, the spiritual supporter, is whether or not you're being very bossy or prescriptive with your advice. Are you offended if people don't take the advice that you give? Do you find that that leaves a sour taste in your mouth? Do you find that if somebody goes to another person for advice as well, you tend to take that personally because you want to be the only person that is approached for space held or divination or whatever? Sometimes the ego can definitely play tricks on us where we can convince ourselves that if our worth is attached to what we give in that regard, then worth is taken away from us by somebody not following what we say, or somebody going to other people for input as well. And a lot of the time when the shadow reacts badly to the feeling of not being followed, you know, one's advice not being followed, or if the shadow reacts badly to knowing that this person has asked others for advice, that usually comes from an old wound, I tend to find. And I've talked, you know, about this with clients many times and audience members over the years. Usually when we find that we are offended or we take it personally that someone doesn't follow our advice or someone goes to others for input, sometimes that can come from a feeling of being overlooked in certain regards when we were younger, or not being taken seriously, you know, not having our efforts really noticed, being overlooked in some way or sidelined in some way when we were really giving our all. And it could happen with your parents, it could happen with teachers, it could happen with a prior emotionally abusive relationship or friendship. Ask yourself if there are old wounds there that are making you feel that way. If you do know that there are old wounds there, or you do discover them, then you may have to go through a journey of healing and release regarding those old wounds, as well as looking at the present relationship where you find yourself wanting this person to obey you and to appreciate only your advice and nobody else's. So you kind of have to shadow work the old and the new in tandem. Those are some of the limitations and the shadowy areas that might come up if you tend to identify and be identified as the nurturer and the spiritual supporter. Obviously it's not an exhaustive list, but I wanted to give some examples. And if you can identify with any of those examples, or you feel that there are other things that are causing a problem for you right now as a nurturer or a spiritual guide or supporter, then I'm about to give you a massive list of things that you can consider doing to get yourself back on track, back in the right lane, if you will, and feeling like you are in control again of your skills and what you can provide, and you feel happy about what you can provide, but you also feel like you're not being taken advantage of and you're not taking it into a shadowy place. Again, this list is not exhaustive, but I want to go into a few things that you might want to think about or try. So the first thing I want to say is that previously in this video I did mention that one of the things that can be a problem when you are a nurturer or a spiritual space holder is that you get pulled into things that you're too close to. Somebody might come to you and they might want to talk to you about someone else that you know. Somebody might come to you and they might want to talk to you about a situation that's really affecting you as well. And therefore you lose your sense of objectivity, and you also end up thinking about it in a way that maybe is not helpful for you. You end up offering help to someone regarding something that you might really need help with, and this is not good, right? So the first thing I want to say is that if you know that it's inappropriate for you to be space holding or offering spiritual guidance about a particular subject, don't be afraid to say so. Don't drag yourself into that area, that quagmire. Don't do that to yourself. If you feel like you're too close to the situation, just gently explain exactly that. Just say, you know what, I'd love to advise you on this or to talk to you about this, but I really feel like I'm not objective enough to be unbiased. I feel like I'm involved, and I feel like that's definitely going to skew what comes through in the cards or what I'm going to say to you. You know, just be honest. If someone can't handle that as part of an adult relationship of any kind, whether it's personal, professional, familial, romantic, whatever, then what the fuck? I mean, they've got work to do. You need to be able to say when something is over the line for you, when it's not something that you can really consider talking about, when it's not going to be helpful. You need to be able to say so. So really, there comes a point where you need to do your work, and you need to differentiate between that work that you're doing and the work somebody else needs to do. If somebody is not going to accept that you are too close to a subject and you're not the right person to talk about it, they really probably need to do some work to figure out what it is that an adult relationship means to them, and why it is that they're finding it so difficult to allow other people to have conversational boundaries. That's not your work to do, that's their work to do, really. This conversation about boundaries, about limits, about how much you should be giving, it comes up most often amongst tarot professionals, I find. Lots of people that pull cards for a living, or for, you know, in a sort of in a part-time way, tend to find that they have people in their lives who come to them for free readings, and often the precedent was originally set that the free readings were okay, but actually it's gotten to a point now where it's draining them. They might be taking on more paid work, and they don't want to take on the free work anymore so much. They don't want to be doing things for family or friends every time they're asked, and that's where we have a discussion about whether or not it is a suitable idea to request payment. So lots of people that have a tarot business end up saying to their friend or their mum or whatever, you know what, it's important to me now that when I give readings I take payment. It's my job now, so I can't just be doing it willy-nilly when I'm off the clock. I feel like it's much better and healthier for me if you book yourself in like an ordinary client would. Obviously, in many ways, this is a difficult thing to say to someone in your life, because if they've been used to just having freebies and they think that's part of the perks of knowing you, then they might be surprised when you start to say that you want to have remuneration. However, at the same time, it's quite easy in a sense compared to those people who are not professionals, who need to consider whether or not they want to start taking some form of payment. Now, some people are going to be listening to this video and thinking, Kellyanne, that's absolutely out of the question. I'm not going to start asking my best friend to pay me to sit there and hold space for them, or my mum or my whatever. And that's fine, totally understandable, but I'm just putting it out there because when professionals have this conversation with each other about, you know, giving endlessly to friends and family and stuff, obviously we sometimes have discussions about whether or not it's appropriate to start charging everyone, or at least expecting friends and family to pay mates rates, so, you know, a discounted fee, but basically still a fee. At what point do you start to realise that your spiritual talents, your spiritual abilities may need to be remunerated in some way? And is it possible that they need to be remunerated financially in some way? Ask yourself how you feel about that. I'm not saying every single person in the world who has some spiritual capability to help others needs to go pro and start a business. I'm not about that. I don't think it's right for everyone. And I certainly am not trying to create this massive army of people that are taking money for every little spiritual thing they do. And certainly, of course, I work as a full-time card slinger and spiritual counsellor, but I don't take money for every single spiritual thing I do. I often give readings to people. Well, I wouldn't say often, super often, but I give readings to friends and I support friends and counsel them through things, of course, gratis, without asking for money. But there does need to come a point where we recognise that we are consistently called upon for things that may require some form of financial remuneration, and maybe it would be good to put that boundary around it. It's different for everyone. I'm not expecting everyone to get on board with this, but for some people it might be useful to hear, especially if you've been on the sidelines umming and ahhing about starting some kind of spiritual enterprise for a while. You've noticed that people keep coming to you and they recommend people and those people come to you, but you're still not making any coin. You're working basically a job, but you're having no remuneration, and it's really starting to drain you and make you fed up. Maybe you need to hear this. Maybe you need to hear that potentially it's time to be remunerated. Another thing that you might want to think about doing is suggesting a specific time to have these kinds of chats and hold this kind of space. So maybe you might want to say something like, I now do readings for friends and family on the full moon. So, you know, I tend to wait until then, and then I do a handful then. So if you want one then, this is the date of the full moon, or the new moon, or whatever you want, and that's when I do it. Rather than doing it willy-nilly on somebody else's terms all the time, you might also want to say that you only do it on your days off. So if you've been working for the day, then you're not willing necessarily to provide spiritual support in the evenings. You might want to suggest maybe a monthly phone call if you notice that someone in your life is really coming to you for spiritual guidance, or you know, to tune in with guides or deceased loved ones, or to have cards pulled. Say to them, you know, it would be really great for me if we could arrange this as a scheduled monthly phone call. I feel like I'll be so much more with it and ready to do it if we do it then. And that's only if you want to keep providing it on that consistent basis. If you know that you're fed up with it and you don't want to provide it anymore, then obviously don't take this piece of advice. But if you know that you do like providing the help, but you would like some boundaries around it, choose a specific time to do it and tell that person that you only offer that kind of thing at that time. I've written here, be honest about needing to break away from the role or ask who else is helping. So be honest about the fact that you might be going through something at the moment that prevents you from offering the amount of advice or support that you were offering before. Again, this can be really difficult when we might pride ourselves on being able to give this, or we feel like it's part of our identity to give this. But everyone goes through challenges, darlings, and sometimes we need to say, I need help, I need space held, I can't really think about this right now, I'm sorry, but I just really need to think of me at the moment. And getting other people on board is important. So if you notice that a friend or a loved one in your life is going through something in a consistent way, it's like an ongoing issue, and they keep coming to you about it, ask them who else they're going to about it. Encourage them to ask other people for input. If you know that there are other friends that you are connected to who don't know that this person is going through difficulty, provided that you are not sworn to secrecy, maybe open up to those other friends and say, you know, she's really going through a hard time right now, he really needs our support, they are really struggling. And get other people on board. You don't have to be the one doing everything. Everybody has their limitations when it comes to giving support. And I know that I have felt so fucking nurtured and so visible when I've been helping somebody within my friendship group really a lot. And another friend says to me, you're not alone, we can help as well. It's not just you that has to do it. You know, let's all get in there, let's all pitch in, let's all encourage them to call us, not just you, but all of us. Sorry, I've got a frog in my throat there. And that's been so helpful for me, honestly. It's been so lovely to know that other people are there to help as well, and it's not just me. You know, just because you are someone that is commonly seen as the one to go to doesn't mean you should be the only one that someone goes to. You need support, you need backup, you need to be able to take the night off, you know? So that's really important. Make sure you ask who else is helping. Are you opening up to others? Do you think it would be a good idea to open up to others? Another thing I wanted to talk about was the thing that I mentioned right at the beginning of the video about setting the precedent that you are going to always give support or always give spiritual counsel. So if you started off a relationship giving out this idea that you're the person that that individual should come to if they have problems, then you're going to basically be faced with the task of setting a new precedent, right? So it's about you really changing the way that you do things, understanding that you are a large part of the reason that the relationship is set up the way that it is now, and you want things to be different in the future. So it's acknowledging that you originally set the precedent and acknowledging that you may still be doing things to encourage it. So for instance, ask yourself plainly, do you keep offering spiritual advice? Do you keep saying, let's talk about this, let's go into it, I'll hold space for you, how do you feel? Do you keep suggesting that you crack the cards out? If you're doing that, then you're setting the precedent that that's what you're there to do. And then of course a person might ask you if they can have that, or they might suggest that that's what they need, because you keep setting the precedent that that's what you're available for and that's what you want to do. So you've kind of got to train yourself out of that. Set a new precedent. Don't be so quick and so keen to offer your services, your energy, your focus, if you know that you're basically at the bottom now of the barrel, that you don't have the fuel for it and you don't necessarily want to do it. You know, make sure that you are not offering if you don't want to offer. Make sure you're not continually setting the precedent that you're trying to break with. Instead, set up new habits, do different things. And one of the things that you can do that I think is really a great idea is encouraging the person that you're talking to and holding space for to think for themselves. So many times we don't say to a person, what do you think of that? What do you want to say? What do you feel the action should be? Where are you coming from? Tune into your intuition. As spiritual people, particularly if we have access to guides, deities, signs, synchronicities, the cards, the runes, the crystal ball, the reiki, the astrology, everything, we very quickly start to apply those practices and those activities to give guidance and to give clarity. Nothing wrong with that, but is it always suitable? Is it always the appropriate thing? I would argue not. I would argue that sometimes it's very disempowering, because at no point do we end up asking the person what they think they ought to do or what they have been mulling over. And especially if you feel like a person is dependent upon your input, if a person is clingy with you, if a person always comes to you before they make choices, you're going to want to come to a point where you don't break out the cards or do the astrology or whatever, but you simply say, what do you think? Tell me what you think. Tell me what you took from the last time we spoke. Tell me what's going on in your mind now. Let's have a chat about what you think is the next thing that it would be appropriate to do. And if that person says, I really don't know, I need you for this, I need you to crack the cards out, I need you to look at my astrology, what's going on with my planet, then you can really just hold a mirror up to them and say, I think that's the problem. I think it might be important for you to tune into your own intuition. And if you want to, you can give advice about how that is best done, some different ideas about it or whatever. But I think sometimes it is suitable in a loving way to hold a mirror up to somebody who is so convinced that they cannot make a decision without your input. Sometimes we need to lovingly hold the mirror up and say, you know what, that's the issue. The issue is that you're not checking in with yourself. You're checking in with me because you've told yourself on some level that you can't check in with yourself. And that's what I really want to help you with. That's what I really want you to consider. If you do use divinatory tools like tarot, for instance, or runes or whatever, ask yourself how you are using those tools. Are you using them in an empowering way? Are you giving the person that you're using them for the opportunity to navigate their own situation through the insight that's coming from that tool? Or are you using the tool to tell them point blank period what they need to do and how to do it? For me, there's a massive difference. And if you want to know more about how I use the cards to give empowering readings, go down below to the link that I'm going to leave for my course, which is available at Ethany's Tarot Academy. It's all about how I give empowering tarot readings. It might be a tarot and oracle. It's not just about tarot. It's about giving empowering card readings, basically. It might be really useful for you if you're looking for a resource that will help you to understand how to use the cards to make somebody feel like they are in the driver's seat. I'm very passionate about this. I had a lot to say. It's a 5-video course, so if you feel like you need to understand how to be empowering with your readings rather than disempowering, definitely go over there and check it out. I think it'll be well worth the money if that's something that you need to focus on in your practice with tarot or oracle. It might be important for you to urge somebody towards action or decisions more quickly than you did do in the past. So if you know that your batteries were really draining down from just holding constant space for people and going through maybe the same things over and over, one thing it's good to do is to urge them towards an action or a decision or a conclusion just a little bit more quickly. So don't allow endless dwelling. I love a good chat. All right, I think it's really helpful to hash things out, to talk things out, sometimes for hours if somebody's up for it. You know, I really love that feeling of just getting to the bottom of something, and sometimes that's what I really need. At other times, though, I can hear myself going through the motions, rehashing the same things, you know, really not getting anywhere with it. And I've seen other people do that when I've been helping them. If you know that you can't provide the same degree of space holding that you did before because it's not healthy for you, notice when you actually start to suggest actions or decisions to the person you're helping. It might get to like the 20-minute mark or the 30-minute mark and you're still talking about something, and it might be an appropriate time for you to say, right, what's the plan of action? We've hashed it out. I understand where you're coming from, but what's next? Let's decide on that. And if you want to draw a card for somebody or something, then fine, but try to make it oriented towards action, towards strategy, towards solo work that they can be getting on with. And that's how you can conclude that part of your conversation with each other. You being the helper, that shouldn't go on all fucking night. That shouldn't go on into the morning and into the next time you see each other and into the next time. You are a nuanced human being. You're not just some spiritual fucking cash cow that can be milked for all you're worth until the other person feels okay. It's got to be more of a dynamic relationship than that, okay? Non-professional relationships where one of you is a spiritual supporter or a space holder or a light worker shouldn't shouldn't be based on one person getting, and you giving, okay? So if it's starting to look like that, you've really got to sort of round it up, round it off, encourage that person to decide what they're going to do next. What is the next right action? What is the next step? Great, okay, do that, and let's talk about it more at another time. Okay, let's do something different now. Let's enjoy another form of conversation. Another piece of advice, there's so much advice, guys. Another piece of advice I would give you is, if you know that you are going to be talking to someone about something and helping them with something, or drawing cards for them about a situation, ask yourself, are you preparing for that? I prepare for the work I do for clients every single day, pretty much, either by hitting the gym, doing some chanting, doing some journaling, filling in my gratitude book, whatever it is, doing a devotional, requesting the presence of my matrons. I do something for myself before I do something for anyone else, and that's the way it has to work. If you know that you're going to be having somebody come over or talk on the phone, and they're going to be asking you for your spiritual input or to hold space for them, don't go in raw. Do some form of prep work before that happens. Strengthen yourself, go to your core, bring everything to you that you need that is high vibe and is for your highest good. Bring your deities to you, call your archetypes in, strengthen yourself for what lies ahead if you do want to provide that input and that generous space holding. Don't do so from this raw, vulnerable place where you haven't defended yourself and shielded yourself first. Get yourself into a strong position. And that's not just spiritual work. That's also making sure that your body is in the right way of being. Have something to eat that's going to take you through that conversation. Have a banana, a nice piece of potassium there, guys. Maybe you have been helping somebody and engaging with somebody who loves you for the high vibe that you provide for them. And it's almost like they always go away floating. But maybe you've started to realise that they actually have a very consistently low vibe. They never really give you any reciprocity in that department. They always come to you very dense, very tense, very worried, very angry, very low. And you're increasingly finding that not only do you have to hold your vibration against that tide, which can be very difficult, but also they tend to sort of take from your vibration and go away feeling great, and you end up feeling quite dense and quite yucky. Now, obviously, going back to what I just said, preparation, shielding, getting yourself ready to hold space is a part of what actually helps you to avoid that. But if you have to hold a consistently high vibration or a good energy, however you want to see it, I know people's language is different, but if you have to constantly maintain your sense of good feeling and balanced feeling against the tide of someone who's constantly in turmoil and constantly angry or fed up, that is going to be a pain in the arse. That is going to be difficult for you. So eventually you do have to ask yourself, is there any reciprocity here? Or am I constantly being the one that is being appreciated and somewhat used for my high vibe, my good energy, my good perspective on things? But actually when they leave, I kind of feel shitty. I kind of feel like, God, that was really such an energy drain for me. There is a point where we do have to ask ourselves if relationships like that have been ongoing in that vein for a very, very long time, and maybe it's time to change the degree to which we want to give in that relationship. And of course, there are ongoing mental health issues with emotional well-being, circumstantial issues that a person is facing that means that they can't be bright and bubbly and joyful all the fucking time. Yes, naturally, but there's also a limit with regard to how much you can be the person to pep them up and make them feel like they've got their little fix. And believe me, it's a little fix, all right? No one can adjust you like that for the long term. You've got to do that work yourself to light yourself up from the inside. So they're getting a temporary hit from you, and they will be back for more, no doubt. So sometimes it's important for you to just reassess how much you want to give to that relationship overall. And sometimes that does require a sit-down conversation. And sometimes it's more of a non-verbal adjustment of the relationship and them following suit in that regard. One thing I would definitely ask you to think about, though, is whether or not you are looking at a relationship in your life and you're telling yourself that it's not reciprocal. You're telling yourself that you don't get anything from them and they always get loads from you. Sometimes that might be the case, that might be what is happening, but other times you might not have recognized that they just give in a different way. So with my best friend, for example, I'll use myself as an example. My best friend is an ISTJ, for those who know the Myers-Briggs type system. And if you don't, basically he's like Spock from Star Trek, okay? He just doesn't really see the logical point in talking, hashing something out. He wants to get very quickly to the strategy, the decision making, what is going to happen next, what is the sensible thing to do. And he doesn't like any sense of energy wastage. I'm an ENTP. I don't think talking is energy wastage. I feel like it's a really good way to hit on the hidden gold. So in some ways we don't understand each other, but our appreciation of each other's differences allows us to really appreciate each other. Even though we don't approach things the same way, I know that his way of helping is being practical, being strategic, thinking what he can do to lighten my load or unburden me in some way. He might not be great at the talking, and he might not be great at hashing out deep emotion, but I've got other friends that I can do that with. I need to understand that his way of helping often involves things like practical help, you know, thinking about what we can do to make things better in the moment, switching from talking about how I feel to talking about what I'm going to do. Previously, I used to see this as cold, sterile, unfeeling. Then I started to get the gist of things. That's how he does it. That's how he shows love. You know, so sometimes we do need to be aware that it's not necessarily that somebody isn't reciprocating. What might be the case is that they just can't hold space like you can. That's not their strength. That is not their function. But their function could be in a completely different area, and they may be reciprocating very much within that area where they are strong. So before you throw the baby out with the bathwater, before you get rid of a connection based on a lack of reciprocity, do ask yourself, is it really a lack of reciprocity, or is it just that I'm not appreciating how much they give to me in other ways? Because that can definitely be sometimes the case. Watch your ego. As I mentioned earlier, there can be egoic reasons why we want to be the one that somebody comes to. We want to be the one that somebody values as the space holder, as the advice giver, as the nurturer. Make sure your heart and your intentions are in the right place, not by making yourself feel guilty and shitty, but just by being honest with yourself and understanding that, you know, being aware of your ego's desire to be top dog or to be the special one is the only way to stop yourself from following that path. Shadow work is about bringing something to awareness so that you can choose your response. So that's what it's about. It's not about eradicating anything shitty in your ego. It's about saying, I'm human. I have some impulses that are not that great, not that recommended. So let me just, you know, be aware of them so I can choose my response, right? Another thing that I wanted to mention was don't be afraid to say if it's not a good time. And that goes back to what I mentioned about not being afraid to say that you're going through a bad time. But also just don't be afraid to say in general that it's not a good time to have the phone call. It's not a good time to break out the cards. You want to do it another time. You're not feeling up to it. You're feeling tired. Don't be afraid to say that. And also, don't try to live up to people's expectations of you or people's perceived expectations. You know, don't tell yourself, oh, I need to fulfill this role now because that's the way I'm perceived. It's all about setting the precedent and resetting the precedent, you know, appreciating how you might have put the precedent in the beginning, that that's what you're going to do and that's who you're going to be. Or maybe other people saw you that way and they set the precedent. But in either way, it's about resetting it now. It's not about you saying, oh, well, I've forever got to live up to this. You know, I don't have any other choice. And the final thing I want to say is maybe think about not RSVPing to invitations where you know you're going to have to sing for your supper. So if you know that somebody always wants to cook you dinner, but they want you to bring your fucking cards over, then ask yourself, is that okay with you? It might be okay with you. You know, every time I go and visit my mum, she says, are you bringing your cards with you? And I always say to her, do bears defecate in wooded areas, mother? Naturally, I'm bringing my cards, darling. I don't mind that. I like that. It's like a tradition. It's like, oh, you bring your cards, definitely bring your cards. Let's have a reading. I like that. But if it was like I was going round to somebody's house every week or once a month or whatever, or they were doing me favours, but they wanted favours back that we hadn't really officially agreed on, or I was getting invited to stuff, but it was always on the proviso that I was going to work my magic and circle the room helping everyone, or go off in another room and do cards, yeah, I would definitely have to put up a barrier around that because that's not fun for me. You know, I'm not just like this this like trick pony that's going to show up and do what I'm expected to do to make everybody else feel better. So don't be expected to sing for your supper. If it's a trade and you're comfortable with that trade, somebody cooks you dinner, you do cards, somebody fixes your car, you do cards, it feels good, it feels like a, you know, a resource-based economy kind of vibe, fucking great, go with it, do it. But if you feel like, you know what, I feel like I'm really being pressured into doing this because somebody is doing something for me, and actually the exchange is not fair, I'd rather stay home and not do cards or not hold space or not, you know, talk astrology all night long to help somebody. If you realise it's that latter one, do something about it, spend less time, or talk about it openly. Depends where you are with that person and how much you feel like direct communication is appropriate. Darlings, this has been a massive video with lots of little suggestions and pieces of advice that I hope will help you to be the most healthy nurturer, space holder and spiritual supporter that you can be. I definitely don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a thing that can be played with shadow, and I think we need to know our limits and we need to feel comfortable with them, and I hope this video has helped some people to get closer to that. As always, please share your comments, your experiences down below. Don't forget to like each other's comments. Don't forget to share, if you can, your experiences of becoming a healthier nurturer or anything from the video that's helped you if you feel like you were looking for advice. I'd love to know what really struck a chord with you. As always, much love until next time, baby cakes. Blessed be.